To to go with my sermon of God Still Speaks, there's a story in the Bible about a little boy named Samuel. And Samuel was a boy that was much prayed for by his mama. In fact, his mama didn't think that she would be able to have kids, and she says, "If you bless me with a child, I will bring him to you." And Samuel was raised in the temple. He was raised in the tabernacle. And his, I guess you would call his adoptive father, was the high priest. His name was Eli. And one night while Samuel's asleep, after saying their good nights, it's not uncommon for Eli to call out for Samuel. Samuel has lots of energy. He's young. Eli's old. He's kind of fat. And, if you need something, you're going to call for the one that has the energy to go and get it for you. And so in the middle of the night, he hears his name. And he gets up and runs to where Eli is, and he says, "You called?" And he's like, "No, I didn't call you." He's like, "Oh, my bad." So he goes back to sleep. And it happens again. And he runs in there to Eli. And he says, "You called?" He says, "I didn't call." He tells him to go back to sleep. Well, this happens 3 times. And so I want to read the verses that's found in 1 Samuel chapter 3 and verses 8 through 11. Because it says, "And then Lord called Samuel the 3rd time. So he arose and went to Eli and said, 'Here I am, for you did call me.' Then Eli perceived that the Lord had called the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, 'Go lay down, and it shall be if he calls you that you may say, Speak, Lord, for your servant hears.' So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood and called as the other times, 'Samuel, Samuel.' And Samuel answered, 'Speak, for your servant hears.'" How many of us know that we have times, or we have kids, that we will say something, they're like, "I didn't hear you." You're like, "Yeah, no, I told you 3 times. No, I didn't hear you." It's because they weren't tuned in to listen. And even Jesus says in the Bible, he says that my sheep will know my voice, and they won't follow another person. See, we all have voices that we recognize. I don't know about those that are growing up now, but before the cell phones, we had our mama's voice. And you could be playing outside, and when it was time to come home, you could hear your voice, your mother call your name, because you were listening, you were tuned in. And if you didn't come by the time that she called the first name, you better watch out if she uses all 3 names. Then you better run home. I never once ran to the wrong home thinking it was my mom, because I had gotten used to her voice. I could recognize her voice. I could recognize her voice in a crowd. I could recognize her voice whether I could see her or not. I knew it was my mom's voice. Why? Because I got used to listening for my mom's voice. So often people will say, "Well, I never hear God." Well, it's because we're not used to listening for him. In the Old Testament, in the Bible, he would lots of times audibly speak. That's really cool. I wished I had that. I wish it would be like a conversation and I just sat down and he said, "All right, here's what you're going to do." And I had no doubt, because I heard him. I heard him and I saw his lips move, and I knew that's exactly what I'm going to do. But God speaks in all different ways. The most way that he speaks is through his word. He will say what he's wanting to say to you a lot of times because he's already like, "I already said it. Now I just need you to read it." Or he'll speak to you in visions or dreams or a song on the radio. He'll speak to you by somebody that says something. You're like, "Man, that's the answer to my question." Well, God moves in all different ways, but we have to listen. How many of us, our ears are so cluttered with so many different voices that it's hard to get through? See, God says that he doesn't shout. He speaks. If he shouted, I think we would call that the Big Bang. And I think we would fall apart. We wouldn't be able to take the vibration of him shouting. In the Bible, it says that he speaks with a still, small voice. Why does he do that? Because if you're going to hear a whisper, you've got to get still. You can't have the radio up full blast. You can't be talking. You can't be using the electric tools. You can't have all these different noises and hear somebody that's whispering. Because if you have all these different noises going on, guess what? Your attention is divided with all these different areas. So God speaks with that still, small voice. And if somebody talks quiet, what do we normally do? We lean in. We get closer. God knows that he can draw us with his voice if we will quiet the rest of the noise. See, God wants to communicate with us. How boring or how bad would a relationship or a friendship be if nobody talked? Or if you were the only one that talked? Trying to get them to talk would be like talking to a rock. I got really tickled at my brother one point. He later on in life, he had a friendship with somebody, and that friend finally said, "You know what? I'm tired of doing all the talking. I just always talk. I always talk and you listen and you don't say anything." And my brother's response was, "Well, then shut up." I love that. So I asked this person, I said, "Well, what did you do?" And he said, "Well, I shut up." We just both kind of sat there. But to have a growing relationship, it needs to be a two-way conversation. You need to talk and you need to listen. Jesus wants to communicate to us, but we have to listen. So what we should do is we should ask God, open up my ears to your voice. Let me be tender and attentive to what you have to say to me. Now, I'm going to tell you ahead of time, that's a very bold and brave prayer to pray. Because if you ask somebody to speak and you will listen, there's a responsibility that comes with that. You have to be willing to do what he says to do if you're going to be all that he's called you to be. Growing up at certain times, when I was grown, people would say, "Well, did you ask so-and-so about this?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because I didn't want to hear the answer. I was honest. I don't want to take the chance of them telling me no. So I don't think I'm going to ask." But with God, if you say, "I want to hear from you. I really want to know what you want me to do with my life," then don't say it until you mean it. Because if you say it before you mean it, it's going to cause a struggle inside of you emotionally, physically, and mentally. You're going to be torn. You're going to do what you think you should do, but down deep inside your soul, you know that God has said something different. But if you're ready for the journey of a lifetime, if you're ready to lay those worries and those fears down, then pray to God, say, "Open my ears so that I can hear your voice." I had a friend that I was talking to one time, and she said, "I don't really hear God." And I said, "You're not listening." I said, "So it's going to come across as a thought in your heart or a thought in your mind, and sometimes it just comes out of the blue." And I said, "So sit down and get quiet. Talk to God and then say, then speak to me, God." And so I talked with her again later, and she said, I did that. And she says, "I don't really know, though." She says, "It wasn't really much of a message. It was something that I've heard all along." And I said, "Well, what was it?" And she says, "He said he loved me." And I said, "I want you to think about that. The creator of the universe that has your attention, that could tell you anything in the world, chose to take that time to say, 'I love you.' Do you know how big that is?" And she said, "Well, it's because I've just heard it all my life." And I said, "You've heard it, but you haven't acknowledged it." I said, "It hasn't sunk in. You've heard it with your ears, but it hasn't hit your heart that he loves you." If you have thoughts that keep coming and those thoughts condemn you and make you feel bad about yourself and that you'll never achieve. You're hearing a voice, but it's not the right voice. Sometimes it's the voice of our parents. Sometimes it's the voice of a spouse, somebody that used to be a friend. Sometimes it's just the enemy. But if you hear a voice that might stretch you out of your comfort zone, but a voice that tells you to do such and such and that you can do it and that he'll be there with you, a voice that lifts you up and encourages you. Don't let the enemy tell you, oh, that's just my mind. That's God speaking to your heart. The more that you tune into that, the more that you will hear him. Now, there are times when he's silent, when he wants to know, I've already told you a whole lot, now let's see what you're going to do with it. In other words, he won't tell you to take step 5 if you haven't taken step 1 yet. So don't keep coming to him and say, talk to me, talk to me, talk to me. He's like, did you do what I asked you to do the first time that I talked to you? I like that he takes it in increments. When I was younger and a lot more naive in this area, I would say, God, show me what you're wanting to do with my life. That would have scared me to death. I wasn't ready for him to show me any of that stuff. And now I tell him, God, show me my next step. That's all I want to know. Don't show me down the road yet. Just show me the next step, because with my ADD, that works for me. You give me that next step, I can follow you. But if you want to hear God's voice, then we have to be open to what he says. Samuel then heard God, and God spoke to him about some things that were going to take place. Samuel, if you follow him throughout the Bible, became one of the main prophets, one of the main mouthpieces that God used. And in fact, in the Bible, it says that everything Samuel prophesied, it came to pass. That's how in tune he was with God. He didn't let his ideas and his thoughts and his opinions get in the way of what God said to do. For example, at one part, when Israel needed a king and Saul had been king, he had told Samuel, go and anoint a certain person out of a household, because that's going to one day be the next king. Well, when he got there was a whole bunch of big guys there, and he called out the eldest one, and he had the oil ready to pour on his head. That was a sign of being anointed. He was going to anoint him for king, because surely this is the guy, right? He's muscular, he's strong, he's wise, he's the eldest. And when he got about here, God stopped him. He said, that's not him. What would have happened if he would have just went with what he thought his own intuition was? He would have anointed the wrong one to be king. There's time and time in the Bible where we're so grateful that the prophets that hear, the people that hear, they don't let their own human logic and their wisdom get in the way. Samuel said, the best thing, speak, Lord. Your servant hears. So often we listen to reply, or we listen, but we're just waiting for them to hush so it's our turn to talk. That's not listening. Listening is when you listen to comprehend or see where a person is coming from, their opinion, so that you can have a conversation. See, one of the worst things that we do that will shut down some relationships that maybe God is wanting us to have, to maybe even bring them to Christianity, is they will spout off something that they say that's complete contrary to what we believe. And rather than listening to them and seeing where they're coming from so that we can have a common ground to stand on to then build a relationship, we automatically go, nope, that's not it, and shut it down. We were only listening so that we could reply to what they were saying. So when he said, your servant's listening, he meant that he was listening to understand exactly what God was telling him to do. And he was going to do that. How vitally important it is to hear God, especially if our decisions will affect other people's lives. Before you make the decision of, oh, she's cute, I'll ask her out. Oh, he's cute. Yeah, I'll say yes. Oh, that sounds like a good job. I got enough money for that car. We should stop and ask God, the one that knows it all, and say, God, I need to hear what you say about this. What are you going to say about this situation? If he tells you yes, then you can go into that situation confident and with peace, knowing that that's the way that he wants you to go. But as Christians, it's so important for us to learn how to listen. Ask God, what is your will for me? And then you have to be still enough to listen. In the Bible, it says, be still and know that I'm God. In other words, stop, but don't just stop physically. Calm your mind. Calm your soul. So that you can hear when he speaks to you. Ask God to open your ears if you're ready. And get ready to hear one of the best messages of your life coming directly from the throne. I want to read in closing one last verse. It's Matthew 4 and verse 4. This is Jesus talking, and he answered, in fact, he answered the enemy on this one, and said, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So you want to live a life where you just don't exist and just get by? You want to live a life that's exciting, that's worthwhile, that has a purpose bigger than you could ever imagine? It's what God will speak to you and I. He says that's what we need to do if we're going to have life. It's vital for us to hear from God. So in closing tonight, see, I didn't keep you long. I gave you a message to think about, but I didn't take up a whole lot of your time. But God's ready to speak, and he still speaks today. The question is are we listening? Ask God to show you how to listen if you don't know. If you've never been able to sit still and be quiet in silence, ask God to help you with that, because that's when he speaks the most. And I can say probably one of the first things that you're going to feel God say to you is that he loves you. And if he would never say anything else, oh, that's enough. But once you open up that door of communication, look out, because your life will be the best it's ever meant to be, and it will never be the same. God bless you.